am glad to see as many people out as we've got today. We have so many things. All right. We have so many things going on in the community today that we have a lot of competition for an audience, so I'm just grateful that we have some enthusiastic history people out there on this Sunday afternoon. So, Voices from the Archive is, we still have people coming in, so I'm just going to stutter for a little bit and give people a chance to sit down. One thing I wanted to say is that the Royal Gorge Museum has been videotaping our programs since we started them in July for this series. So they've already got up, there's 5 programs in the series, and they've already got 5 of them up on their YouTube channel that we can, 3 of them, I'm sorry, there's 5 in the series. They've got 3 of them up on their YouTube channel that you can share with other people or watch as you please. So they're available by going to the Royal Gorge Museum website, and there's a link there that will take you to their YouTube channel, and that's how you get to view these programs. So I'm starting again, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. So the title of this program, this series of programs is Voices from the Archive, Stories of Immigrants and Pioneers. This is part 4 today. Thank you for coming. And we're going to start right out with the introduction. May 5th, 1944. Dear folks, I am doing fine in this German camp, cooking and feeding myself well. I'm making cooking utensils to help with that work. Please don't worry about me. I will write more soon. Clint. The first letter received by Mr. and Mrs. Floyd Edwards from their son as a POW in World War II. We left Rogersville, Tennessee on the train in January 1907. Me, Ma, Winnie, and Thelma, and the baby. He was 2 months old and Ma had packed a big wicker basket with food for the trip. Mr. Hell drove us to the train depot and helped lift the basket onto the train. How are we doing now? Okay, thank you. He told me it was my job to keep Winnie and Thelma out of the food so it would last all the way to Colorado. Pa met us at the Pueblo Depot in the middle of the night of the 3rd day. He had come out 2 months before us with my 2 older brothers to begin his new job of managing the livestock on a farm in Florence. It was bitter cold that night as we walked to a hotel near the train station. Pa had reserved a room upstairs for us. But the next morning was bright and sunny, and I would soon learn that that was typical of this new place and this new home. We were back at the depot early to take the train to Florence. Pa rode on the back of the caboose all the way. He didn't want to miss any view of the grand new homeland that he had already come to love. Ma, however, didn't think it was much to look at. Elsie Watkins, 1971, describing in an interview her family's move to Florence. Mrs. Kirk and Renner, skilled and artistic dispensers of ladies' headwear from Colorado Springs, have opened a splendid stock of new fall millinery in the new brick building now completed on the corner of Main Street and Petroleum Avenue. Already so many purchases have been made that their extensive stock will be renewed at once with a large additional order that has been placed with Eastern Houses and is now on the road. The Florence Daily Herald, October 11th, 1897. Voices from the Archive is the focus research project for 2021 of the Florence Historical Archive. Every year, the organization chooses a topic of significance to our local history, and members conduct research on various aspects of the topic. Normally we present a 2-hour program on that research at the community college in Canyon City, in that their mini college program that they help hold for seniors and for the community. That was ended when the pandemic struck, but we hope to be back again doing that kind of a program in 2022. In addition to, for the last 3 years, we have presented a series of programs created from our annual research project here at the Bell Tower, and we are invited each year to present programs based on our research to local organizations. This year, we have been back at the Bell Tower every second Sunday since June, and we have one more program after today in November. So we hope you all will pick up a flyer about it, and that you'll make it out next month. With this year's topic, Voices from the Archive, our goal was to bring new material to light on the experiences of the earliest people in Florence. We wanted to unearth some of the hidden gems of information from the archive's files in the form of letters, diaries, newspapers, books, and photos, and as often as possible from the actual voices of early settlers, through family stories and memories, via interview with the descendants of these people. In addition, we were interested in understanding how the village was formed, the stories of events that led to the development and social history, the culture and ethnic influences and patterns of settlement in the neighborhoods and the subdivisions of the town. Today, Sylvia Andrews will share her research as a guest speaker on the Eastern European immigrant groups and their influence and their cultures as well, followed by Melvina Benham with the businesses that Jack built, her research on the area's business families, and Rita Bruner will conclude today with a program. So we're pretty excited because Sylvia's research, like last month when Margaret Storm presented information on the Loback family, Sylvia's research involves actually visiting with members of various families in these Eastern European groups. So, thank you, and Sylvia.
My Czech ancestors only made it to the Midwest, so the people that came out here were a little more adventurous. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, about Eastern European immigration in general to Colorado, and then I'm going to get into the oral interviews that I did. For almost 4 centuries, Czechoslovakia's largest provinces, Bohemia and Moravia, and their eastern neighbor, Slovakia, had been under the control of the Austrian Habsburg monarchy and part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Slovaks had been under Magyar rule for over 800 years, so when the opportunity came to migrate, they seized it. Over 622,000 Czechs and more than 619,000 Slovaks were living in the United States by 1920. And this is a conservative estimate, actually, because they were often listed just as Hungarian in the census. When asked why they decided to settle in Colorado, many Czechs and Slovak Americans replied, "It reminds me of my homeland." Of course, there were economic inducements to the region, including mining, coal, and precious metals, working for the Denver and Pueblo smelters, and farming on the Colorado High Plains. From the mid-19th century to the early 1900s, Czechs migrated to the United States in increasingly large numbers, and they were followed by a mass movement of Slovaks from the 1880s through the First World War. Hundreds of Slavic immigrants, go ahead. Hundreds of Slavic immigrants, especially Slovenians, South Slavs from Slovenia, settled in the Pueblo neighborhood known as the Grove. The community was often referred to as Little Slovenia during the early 1900s. It centered on Clark Street along the northern bank of the Arkansas River. Later, after the Pueblo flood of 1921, the Slavic neighborhood expanded south across the river to the Bessemer district, near the plants of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, whose agents had canvassed the east in search of immigrant laborers. Rockville was a CFI coal town, incorporated in 1886 in Fremont County. From the 1890s to the 1920s, a large population of Slovak coal miners worked in the Rockville area. The town supported at least 2 saloons owned and operated by John Kochan and John Marasek. The lodges were very important, like Lodge number 183 of the Roman and Greek Catholic Slovak Benefit Association. The Rockville contingent also had a juvenile branch, Lodge number 113. In 1909, Rockville Slovaks formed a gymnastic union, Sokol, Lodge number 188, an athletic organization that encouraged activities to build healthy and strong bodies through gymnastics and was organized along religious lines. In some cases, there was divisiveness among the lodges because some Slovaks welcomed everyone and other lodges only welcomed the Catholic priests in them only welcomed those that were loyal to the Hungarian crown. So, in addition to Rockville, many other CNF&I coal camps provided employment to Czech and especially Slovak laborers. Czechs were more likely to be in the trades and Slovaks in mining. One of many Slovak coal miners in the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company was Jacob Sloda. He had 2 sons that demonstrate that second-generation Slavic Americans were often denied an education because they needed their salaries to support the family. And also, they resisted being in American schools because it reminded them of when they were under Magyarization, and they were forced to go to the Magyar schools. So they usually started their own religious schools to preserve their culture. So, the first of my oral history interviews was with Chester Janicek. He couldn't be here because he was not feeling well, but he was a veteran and ran Blitz Motors in Florence until it closed up. Then they built their own body shop in Penrose, and he was in it from 1965 until 2015. And so that was about 50 years. He's in the picture. He's the smiling face in the middle of between his sister and his older brother. So Diane and brother Joe and Sandra. The bottom row is Janice, Francis, Michael, Mom Ethel, Sharon, Dad Rudolph, and Patricia. Next. This is a page from the amazing genealogical research book that the Janiceks in Kansas have compiled that begins with great-grandfather Rudolf Frank, born in Moravia in 1868 in Czechoslovakia, and he died in Stratton, Nebraska. The second arrow down shows that he married Mary Kundasek in Herndon, Kansas. She was born in Moravia also and died in 1953 in Atwood, Kansas. Grandfather Charles was born in 1894 and died in 1965 in Herndon, Kansas. He married Lydia Mychek, born in 1899 and died in 1990 in Herndon, Kansas. Chester related that one of his ancestors in Kansas was killed by an Indian. His grandfather was a farmer in Kansas and ran a shoe repair and harness shop in Herndon. Chester's father, Ralph, had a shoe shop in Manitou Springs and was a mechanic and made service boots for Fort Carson. They moved here in the early 1950s and he retired in 1962. He was a World War II veteran and was in Vietnam and Korea. The family lived in Germany for 3 years and in Baumholder, and they liked it there. They went over by boat and docked in France and crossed France by train to Germany. They learned to speak German. Mike, Janice, and Diane and Chester are still living, and some lived here in Florence. Mike is in Alaska. 2 sisters are in Tennessee. They try to get together every year. Thanks so much to Chester for sharing your genealogical information with the archive. So next I'm going to talk about Poland. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, Polish immigration skyrocketed in the United States. You can see Poland is up above the Czech Republic. And only the southern portion of Poland was actually in the Hungarian Empire, but they came here for the same reasons, basically, imperial repression and chronic unemployment and land shortages. They did not just migrate as individuals, but they traveled as a family strategy to improve their social and economic status. Although most Polish communities in the Great Plains were agrarian, industrial communities formed as well, especially around extractive industries. They mined coal in Oklahoma, Colorado, and Alberta, and smelted zinc in Oklahoma. In many cases, they came from Pennsylvania. So, Gloria Jaworski-Stencil was my next interview, and she's here. Would you like to stand up, Gloria? Okay. So her Polish I hope I have this right. Her Polish grandfather lived in Rockville. Her father Edward's parents were Joseph Jokowski, born in 1883, in Huta Komorowska, Podkarpacki, Poland, and Pauline Kamiński, born in 1896, in Rockville. Her great-grandmother on her mom's side was Mary Kamiński. Gloria called her little grandma. Gloria was only about 5 or 6 when she died. She does not have many documents, but remembers eating pierogies, borscht without beets, but with milk, eggs, and sausage. This slide shows that Pauline lived in Rockville in 1940 with her husband Joe and had 5 daughters and 4 sons, one of which was Edward, her father, or Gloria's father. Anna Kamiński-Slack was Pauline Kamiński's sister. She married Joseph Slack. One child was Willie Slack. Gloria's father, Edward Jokowski, married Virginia DiCarlo, and cousin Willie Slack married Frances DiCarlo, so the 2 cousins married 2 DiCarlo sisters. Frances was Gloria's aunt, and Willie was her uncle. Their children and Gloria's cousins are Willie Slack in Florence and Jerry Slack in Rockville. The DiCarlos came from Santa Ninfa, Sicily. The wedding picture here is Anna Kamiński and Joseph Slack that I got from Willie Slack. The family tree for Joseph Jokowski in Poland can be found on Jeannie, and Edward and Virginia are buried in Union Highlands Cemetery. Is that right? More or less. Okay, Frances Fry Slack is, Frances Fry Slack moved to Rockville early in life, where she met William Slack, who was the love of her life, and married him in 1946. She loved to make homemade bread and pasta and was Italian through and through. Her obit names her sister, Virginia DiCarlo Jokowski, Gloria's mother. Okay, next is, this is amazingly all Yugoslavia before it was divided into all those different countries, and Slovenia is at the top. The town of Prospect Heights also attracted immigration from former Yugoslavia, particularly from Slovenia, at the top of this map. The booklet, Town of Prospect Heights, was published by the Fremont County Historical Society and discusses this topic at length, and particularly the Adamic family, whose members have been consistently prominent. The smelters and mines around Prospect Heights happen to draw a concentration of Slavic immigrants. Recreational activities were a big part of life. Many people played musical instruments and they loved dancing. The polka was their favorite. They also liked baseball, horseshoes, picnicking, and swimming. Some of these people came from other mining areas around Colorado. So to learn more about them, you can acquire this booklet from the archive. And there's a great deal about the Adamics in here. So I'm focusing on the Javernick family here in Florence. And Angie is here. Do you want to raise your hand? Yeah, that's Angie. Okay. So Frank came over in 1903 and Angela in 1905, and they lived in Pueblo first. Frank lived in Colorado for 2 years before moving to Canyon City. They were originally from Ljubljana, Yugoslavia, and I just wanted to say that I was there on a trip to Europe. I was there for a couple of days. It was beautiful, and the people were very nice, and we had found a lot of hat shops where they were making handmade war hats like these. The grandfather, well, let's see. Angela was born in 1887 and Frank in 1878. So he was a lot older than the grandmother. Then other people who came with them were, Angela came over to her sister in Pueblo, and Frank had a cousin in Canyon, and 3 others may have come with their grandpa. One was Michael Brewster. Her sister came over by herself when she was 14 and landed in Leadville. It was very common for people to come over here to towns where they already knew people, or where their relatives were already settled. And her grandparents actually never spoke English, but her dad translated. They got to know them, but more the grandmother, especially because they were separated and they went to visit her on Sundays. She always had 2 pots of coffee, one with cream and sugar and one black. She always wore aprons and always had a coin purse and gave them a nickel or a dime. And she always gave them something to eat, like cookies or bread with cinnamon and sugar. So these are the pictures of their children. Let's see, Frank, Harry, Michael, who died at age 12, Fred, Angie's dad, from the left to the right, John, Joseph, Edward, Ludwig, and Vincent. So you can see why they were called Bojans. We talked about slang words that they called each other, and of course, they might have been politically incorrect today, but honestly, they would fight back and forth between themselves, and the jokes were in good fun. Bohunk or Bojan was not necessarily derogatory. You said by a friend or family. And Marty told me that they came from the time, that name came from the time that they were getting on the boat in Marseille, and the French people called them handsome people. Discussion of so many peoples are related in Florence and Canyon, and lots of people that are related are of different nationalities. A lot of Adamics are still in town, and the book on Prospect Heights cleared up some of their relationships to the Adamics. Next. Frank registered for the draft when he was 64 years old, just barely over the limit. The requirement was men born on April 1877, and he was born on January of 1878. So, next. That's Angie's mom's graduation picture from 1936. Her nickname was Sally, and she went to Florence High School. She liked to play basketball and baseball. The mom on the Signorelli side was Mary Signorelli, and Angie and Pat, have family in Italy that they had visited. And that's the wedding picture. But the father was Anthony Signorelli, and several sisters and brothers. Angie died in 1971, and Fred remarried Florence McLean, who had been Angie's boss at the hospital and her 4-H leader, so they got along very well. In 1944, they moved to Florence, and her dad wanted to have a farm. Their home place was 1435 West 3rd. The grandmother only lived 2 blocks away in 2 houses put together. They had a truck farm, and the grandpa raised a lot of vegetables and would truck it to Salida. Fremont Ditch provided the water. So this is a picture of a certificate that he received for working for CFNI for 20 years. Nonag Mine, Canyon spelled backwards, had 150 miners in 1942, and this was the night shift. Fred is the tall one in the middle of the back row. Other Slavic names included in the picture are Louis Skuvka, Tony Storica, Frank Struble, Eddie Struble, and Frank and Louis Adamic. The mine closed in 1952, but in its 63-year history, it contributed much to the economy of the region. And this picture was loaned to the family, to the Daily Record by Mrs. Ann Skuvka. So Father Michael, here in Florence, set up a memorial for Fred. It had it had pictures of his garden and pigs and bingo call. He was a bingo caller for the Eagles. He loved to play horseshoes. It had hats because he loved hats, and the watermelon and pictures of watermelon and cantaloupe that he brought up from Rocky Ford. He listened to the Slovenia Hour on the radio, and he liked polka music, and sometimes he would go dancing at 2 different places in the same evening. And the funeral was the talk of the town because they had never done anything like that before, with pictures of everything that he loved. He also loved Walter's beer. Even after they went out of business, he still asked for it at restaurants. It was distributed on Front Street and made in Pueblo. So his obit says, born in 1919, he worked in the mine since he was 16 and at CFNI for 31 years. He retired in 1982. He died in 1992. He was active in the community and was president of the Florence Eagles 169 for 6 years. He loved gardening and horseshoes. In Ancestry.com, he is listed as Fred Matthew Hansen Javernick. So, let's see, that's a picture of their family. I just found this kind of interesting. It's from Colorado Magazine, just to conclude. In a futile effort to check the burgeoning exodus of various nationalities from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in 1882, a Vienna newspaper farcically warned prospective immigrants of dangers that lay ahead of them in the United States, particularly in the American West. Although they are promised the highest wages in order to attract many victims, when they arrive, they are left on the prairies and paid nothing, and are besides swindled terribly. Most of these unfortunates fall prey to suffering, or they are attacked by fever or some other American sickness and thus die. Many are sent into the mines very far away where they never have an opportunity to return because they never earn the money for the journey back. If a man obtains work with a farmer, the latter keeps back the wages, and when $20 have thus fallen due to the farmer, he kills the poor man to keep the money. Travel in America is still very dangerous. The traveler is compelled to fight with wild beasts, snakes, hunger, water, heat, and cold. Many are nevertheless determined to ride and jump on the trains in order to get to the prairies, and are afterward found starved to death on the freight trains. With the best of resolution, a man cannot get work in this wilderness. But still, that's the article from the Colorado Magazine, spring 1977. But still the immigrants came, and many eventually discovered political freedom, happiness, and economic opportunity in Colorado. So thanks so much to these 3 families, and I'm glad that some of them are here. And they provided these stories and documents and photographs, which are in the Florence Historical Archive. It was such a pleasure to interview you guys. Thanks. So part 2 of our program is Malvina Dunham with her research on the Jack family, the business that Jack built, about the Jack family.
Is that better? Can everybody hear me? My presentation for the Voices of the Archive is not based on interviews or first-hand accounts from members of the Jack family. However, I did find some written family history by some ancestral members of the Jack family related to those here in Florence. The voices in this case comes from vintage newspapers that we have at the archive, either in hard copy or on microfilm, and some from the Colorado Historic Newspaper Collection. Most of the pictures you are going to see on the PowerPoint are not actual members of the Jack family, but they are pictures that I feel represent the members of the family based on the few pictures that I did find. There were two Jack brothers who came to Florence. Edwin Fletcher Jack arrived in Denver in 1888, remaining there for about a year. He then moved to Florence in 1889 with his first job being with the Florence Oil Company. Delbert Adolphus Jack arrived at Florence in November of 1891. Patrick Jack, great-great-great-grandfather of Delbert and Edwin, moved his family from Ireland and arrived in Pennsylvania in the United States sometime prior to 1752. One of Patrick's sons, John, settled in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, and married Eleanor Stevenson. They became Delbert and Edwin's great-great-grandparents. John served as a ranger on the frontier during the Revolutionary War. On February 16, 1773, John's brother James and their father moved to Charlottetown, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, having moved from Pennsylvania due to the French and Indian War. In Charlottetown, they built a house where they operated a tavern and became prosperous and influential. On May 17, 1775, a rider raced into Charlottetown with the news of the massacre of the colonists by the British troops in Lexington and Concord. A group of patriots met, likely at the Jack Tavern, drafting the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, and also drafted a set of resolves outlining how they would self-govern. This treacherous document declared that the actions of the Crown were intolerable. According to local legend, James Jack volunteered to take these powerful documents on the arduous journey to the Continental Congress. James, knowing that if caught, he would be hung, he risked his livelihood, property, and family to transport these important documents. He set out on his ride in June, slipping past British regulars and spying Tories. Jack arrived in Philadelphia and demanded that the Mecklenburg County's Declaration of Freedom be read into the record. The 43-year-old patriot averaged around 30 miles of hard riding each day, completed his 1,100-mile trip in about 38 days. Some of you may have heard of Captain Jack, who was born Ellen Elliot in New Lantern, Nottingham, England, on November 4th, 1842. As a young child, a queen of a gypsy band who camped on the family estate prophesied that Ellen was a born traveler, and if she were a male, would be a great mining expert. She was a Rosicrucian, or a finder of hidden treasure. She would meet great sorrows and be a widow early in life. As a teen, she gave her heart to Carl, a Russian. In a fit of jealous rage, after spying her with another man, Carl stabbed her at least twice in the chest, missing her heart by about an inch. The other man, unknown to Carl, was her cousin. During her recuperation, Ellen took a trip to the United States, and on the ship, returning to England, she met the handsome and dashing Charles E. Jack, whose father may be the brother of George Washington Jack, the father of Delbert and Edwin. They were soon married and moved to Brooklyn, New York. During the Civil War, Charles E. Jack, Ellen's husband, became captain of one of the Union Navy ships and was sent to New Orleans Harbor to help in the blockade. During the bombing in the harbor, Charles' ship was damaged and sunk, and he was injured internally, an injury from which he never fully recovered. Charles and Ellen had a daughter and a son. Both died within days of each other from scarlet fever. After their deaths, Charles and Ellen had 2 more daughters, shortly after which Charles died of his war injuries. The youngest of the 2 daughters also died of scarlet fever. Being devastated, Ellen left her remaining daughter with her sister-in-law and moved to Colorado. In Denver, she encountered a previous nanny who called Ellen Captain Jack, and the name stuck. Captain Jack became a tough, gun-toting woman and a bit of a spiritualist, spending many of the following years wandering around Colorado and dueling with bandits. She mined for gold, silver, zinc, and coal. She moved to Gunnison, where she opened an eating house in a tent and a boarding house known as Jack's Cabin. She bought a 1/2 ownership in the Black Queen mine. By 1903, she had moved to Colorado Springs and was exploiting gullible tourists. Outfitted in a simple cotton blouse, wool skirt, and laced-up boots, she accessorized with a mining pick and a 6-shooter tucked into her belt. Captain Jack posed for postcards, which she sold at Captain Jack's place. She rented captains and cooked up a delicious fried chicken dinner for those who braved the narrow winding road up High Drive. Quite an eccentric, she lived with her pet burro, cats, and parrots. In 1920, a flood washed out High Drive, and the city decided not to rebuild the road. Ellen's health deteriorated, and she died on June 16, 1921, from leakage of the heart. Her grave is in Evergreen Cemetery and faces High Drive. A quote from Captain Jack: "I do not fear men or devil. It is not in my blood. And if they can shoot any straighter or quicker than I, then let them try it. For 44 equalizes frail women and brute men, and all women ought to be able to protect themselves against such ruffians." Lida Narcissus Keck became Mrs. Delbert Adolphus Jack. Her ancestors came from Germany to Pennsylvania. Her great-great-great-great-grandparents, Henry S. and Hannah Keck, came to America on the English ship Clyde, arriving in Pennsylvania October 1732. Before they could leave the ship, they had to take an oath of allegiance to King George II. Upon reaching land, they were sold to a man in Chester County, Pennsylvania, to pay for their passage. They served as redemptioners or indentured servants and agreed upon time of 3 to 4 years. When Lida's father, Joseph Aloysius Keck, was 9 years old, his father, Henry Keck, died, and a few years later his mother wanted to remarry. Since it was thought not to be a good to combine families, all of her children were taken in by her husband's brothers until the children were old enough to be apprenticed for a trade. Joseph was apprenticed as a tailor. After becoming an adult, Joseph Keck went to California and mined for gold and was reasonably successful. The money was sent home and his parents purchased farmland for him. On arriving home, he purchased more land and married Ingaba. He did well with his farming and stock raising, and they had a home in town which they lived in during the winter so the children could attend school, and a home on the farm where they could stay during the summer. He became involved in politics and became the mayor of Biddensport, Iowa in 1856. Lida was born May 6, 1865. She had 11 brothers and 1 sister, one of which died young. Some of the Pennsylvania Jacks had also moved to Utica and Biddensport, Iowa area, where Delbert was born May 1st, 1860, and Edwin was born February 21st, 1866. Delbert Adolphus Jack married Lida Narcissus Keck on October 23rd, 1882 in Bittensport. Their first 5 children, Lindell Orville, Glenwood W., Mary Elizabeth, Ethel Jo, and Laura Ingaba were born in Bittensport. Ethel Jo died in 1890 at the age of 2. Edwin Fletcher Jack arrived in Denver in 1888 and stayed there for a year. Then, in 1889, he traveled to Florence and was employed by the Florence Oil Company. In June of 1890, W.P. Wilbar opened a grocery store on Main Street in Florence in the Union Block, which is now the Two Sisters Restaurant. The June 12, 1890 copy of the Florence Refiner notes that Ed Jack is the affable clerk at Wilbar's Grocery. July 24, 1890, the Petroleum Band was organized with 16 members, and Ed Jack, one of the members, served as one of the trustees of the band. The Florence Oil Refiner of November 13, 1891 states that Ed Jack's brother Delbert, or better known as D.A. Jack, arrived and seeing the sights of Florence. It stated that D.A. was delighted with what he saw and is returning home to Bittensport. We learned that Ed has invested in a house and a lot on Front Street. The December 4th newspaper states that D.A. and his family arrived from Bittensport, Iowa, and the next day purchased Wilbar's stock of groceries. The trade was virtually made 2 weeks ago when Mr. Jack was here on a visit, but the transfer was not made until his arrival on Friday, and it also turns out that Ed was a silent partner with W.P. Wilbar. It is noted that D.A. is a thorough businessman, agreeable and courteous to everyone. Following is from one of the county papers at Mr. Jack's former home. Mr. Jack and his wife and entire family left here Wednesday evening for their new home in Florence, Colorado. They take considerable capital with them and seem to have a good prospect before them. Lida traveled here at the end of November with her husband and 4 children, the oldest being 8 and the youngest 2. She is expecting another child, Eva Bessie Jack, who was born February 2nd of 1892. Edwin married Jeannie Walters on February 3rd, 1892. Jeannie was born in Iowa in 1872. She and her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Walter and brother Thomas, moved to Coal Creek, Colorado in 1880. Mr. and Mrs. E.F. Jack moved into the Wilbar Cottage on 3rd Street within a couple of weeks of their wedding. Ed had the home furnished and everything in readiness for the housekeeping before his wedding day. So the house and lot Ed invested in on Front Street must have been for the D.A. Jack family to move into. E.F. and Jenny built a house on 519 2nd Street here in Florence, which is part of the Union Oil addition. March 2nd, 1897, the Jack brothers moved their location in the Union Block, current Two Sisters Restaurant, to their new and more commodious quarters in the Bank Block on Front and on the east side of Pikes Peak. The business now becomes known as the Boston Dry Goods and Clothing Company. They are now offering a full line of department store goods, notions, tinware, cleanware, graniteware, stoves, ladies and gents furnishings, and furnishings are like ties, and have added a full line of clothing, hats, cigars, and tobacco. By 1899, the Florence Daily Citizen states that the Jack brothers are making their corner block one of the best stores in town. In April of 1887, there were 2 newspapers in Florence, and they did not have the same opinion of D.A. Jack, as he ran for either school board president or treasurer. And one paper listed him as running for president, and the other one listed him as running for treasurer. I don't know which it was. The Florence Refiner states, the Daily Hoodoo does not know D.A. Jack because he refused to be held up by the deadbeat milliner, Bertle. D.A. Jack pays over $100 taxes against your $0. He has constructed $10,000 worth of buildings in Florence against your $0. He enjoys the respect and confidence of every man and woman in Florence, which cannot be said of you or your owners. But what a contemptible way of campaigning. Slur a man simply because he does not see fit to patronize a holdup. The Florence Daily Herald responded on May 3rd, 1897. D.A. Jack is a candidate for school treasurer. His name is of so little importance politically in public affairs of the town or even in business. Judging as one naturally does, who is Jack? A friend of the Herald has called our attention to a statement made on Jack's behalf to the effect that he has a $10,000 building in town, presumably built out of earnings in trade. The same friend remarked that Jack is a prohibitionist and an evangelical light. Incidentally, he said that a great many people besides those who do not repose a special confidence in or entertain any particular respect for him might be interested in knowing how the $10,000 building is being used, inasmuch as Jack does not occupy it himself, but finds it more profitable to rent. Where is this mystery about Jack and the house that Jack built? In December of 1900, one of the town's businessmen, Colonel Fitzgerald, and a kind-hearted woman traveled to Old Mexico, absconding with about $2,500 of the insurance company he operated and leaving his wife behind. Mr. Lutz, who was the Colonel's chief clerk, and D.A. Jack, one of the best known and most reliable businessmen in the city, have formed a partnership, and they will continue the business at the old stand. They will make a strong firm, and members of which are a credit to the town. December 20th of 1900, the D.A. Jacks are having Joseph Wilson, an architect, draw plans for a strictly modern house on East 3rd Street in the Homestead subdivision. It will contain 9 rooms, and pressed brick will be used in the construction of the walls. Mr. Jack and family will occupy it. It will be a thing of beauty and will be a credit to East Florence. March 23rd, 1901, the contract for the construction of the Jack House was signed by John Stewart as contractor, with the contract price being $4,000. It is to be 2 stories high and contain 9 rooms and 2 bathrooms. There were to be 5 rooms and a hall on the lower floor and 4 rooms above. The principal rooms of the first story will be finished in oak. According to the contract, the work will commence at once and will be completed in 90 days. The house will be entirely modern. By April 9th, 1901, the foundation walls for the 10-room brick house residence on 3rd has been completed. One of the most beautiful resident portions of Florence is the Homestead Park Addition lying east of McCandless Avenue and north of 3rd Street. 1 year ago, this was a lovely alfalfa field, the product of which brought $60 per acre. But today, it has appeared as if a fairy has passed her wand over it, causing beautiful residents to spring up. Work on the $4,000 house of D.A. Jack is being pushed as far as possible and will be completed by the last of June. By May 8th, the house is assuming imposing portions. The red pressed brick used in the walls presents an elegant appearance. With 7 bricklayers at work, the house will be ready to receive the roof next week. By May 25th, the $5,000 residence on the corner of East 3rd Street and Robinson is progressing nicely, and the work of shingling the house was finished this evening. The floor will be laid next week. It is thought now that the entire building will be completed by July 10th, and the owner intends moving in about the middle of July. July 31st, 1901, article from the Florence Daily Tribune. The house that Jack built. It is altogether probable that every man, woman, and child in Florence has read this story, The House That Jack Built, and remembers all the interesting pictures connected with that thrilling tale. But an object lesson is always more impressive than an abstract rehearsal of the fact. So in order to get the correct idea of the house that Jack built, one needs only to walk out to the corner of 3rd and Robinson and see for himself. At that place is located D.A. Jack's fine new residence, and it is an ornament to the city. Located as it is in what will eventually be the popular resident portion of the city, and commanding a beautiful view of Old Pikes Peak and the range to the north. No more desirable spot for a residence could be selected. The house is a big 2-story pressed brick structure containing 12 large, light and airy rooms. The first floor is furnished in antique oak, and the front windows contain embellishments of stained glass, making a very pretty effect. The porch surrounds the front and east side, and the roof of which is supported by massive pillars. The house is trimmed in cream and green, and the roof is moss green. On the ground floor is a large reception hall, parlor, sitting room, bedroom, dining room, kitchen, and pantry. The second floor has 5 bedrooms, a magnificent bathroom, and numerous closets. The bathroom is fitted with all the modern sanitary appliances. A hot air furnace is being installed by George Wilson, and the entire house will be heated from it. The furnace is the same as that used in the Presbyterian Church, which has given perfect satisfaction. And just as a note, there's not a single fireplace in that house. So it was totally heated by this furnace. Denver pressed brick were used in the construction of the house, and all the material is of the proportionately good quality. Contractor John Stewart has done himself proud on this building. The Jack family will occupy the house about the 1st of next week. In 1906, Edwin sold his portion of the Boston Dry Goods and Clothing Company to D.A. Jack and Lyda. Edwin operated a real estate and insurance business. Edwin and Jenny Jack had 1 daughter, Lucille. The Florence Daily Tribune, March 14, 1901, that notes that D.A. Jack is on the citizen ticket running for city treasurer. On March 22nd, it states, "The people are not going to turn down D.A. Jack as city treasurer, for he has been tried and not found wanting. He is known to be a careful, conservative man and his standing is such that it is not necessary for him to apply to a trust company for a liability bond. Jack will be elected in the with the balance of the citizen's ticket. D.A. Jack was elected as treasurer of the Presbyterian Church and treasurer of the city of Florence in 1901. D.A. Jack was also elected secretary of the school board and was part of the Republican caucuses in October 10, 1901. In 1913, D.A. Jack became the president of Florence Chamber of Commerce. In February of 1916, D.A. Jack is listed as the director of the First National Bank. The last child of D.A. and Lida Jack was born on April 6, 1902, bringing to a total of 8 children. Linda Orville Jack, Glenwood W. Jack, Mary Elizabeth Jack, Ethel Jo Jack, deceased, Laura Inglewood Jack, Eva Bessie Jack, Edwin Lee Jack, and Delbert Eugene Jack. E.F. Jack and Jenny E. Walters Jack continued to live in the house they built on 2nd Street until their deaths. E.F. died on September 2nd, 1935, following a 2-month illness. He is buried at Union Highlands Cemetery. Jenny Elizabeth Walters Jack died June 15, 1950. Her health had been failing for the prior 2 months. She had recovered enough to be at home, where she suffered a heart attack and was taken to St. Joseph Hospital, where she died. She is buried next to her husband in Union Highlands Cemetery. D.A. and Lida sold the Boston Dry Goods Company and Clothing Company in 1920 to G.B. Piercy and Associates and moved to Inglewood, California, where they lived until their deaths. D.A. Jack died on December 31st, 1928 in Inglewood, California, at the home of his daughter and son-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Alfred Lucier. He was 68 when he died. He died of apoplexy, which is cerebral hemorrhage or stroke, and is buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in San Jose, California. Lida Narcissus Keck Jack died May 3rd, 1945 at the home of her daughter, Eva Bessie Lucier, in Inglewood, California. Cause of death was chronic pyelonephrosis or kidney inflammation. She is buried next to her husband in Oak Hill Cemetery, San Jose, California. And in the things that was handed out to you is the rhyme that Jack built, of the house that Jack built. Now we'll have Rita come forward and she'll do our closing for us. Thank you.
Beyond being dedicated to preserving history and serving as great researchers for people in our neighborhood and in other states, the members of our Florence Archive are also published writers. They are the voice of the archive now in its most present form. May I introduce them? There is Millie Windsor. She is an author, co-author for the Fremont Heritage Council. Dorothy Cool, she is an author of 5 books, and she is a contributor to the geocache for Fremont County. Carol McNew is an author, co-writer, and an editor, Fremont Historical Society, the Heritage Council, and the Crusaders newspaper. Dion Bowden is an author and editor, Marty Lacoste, author and editor. And Margaret Storm is an editor, co-author, Territorial Daughters of Colorado, Heritage Council, and the Fremont Historical Society. I'm very proud to get to know each and every one of these ladies, and I think Melvina and I better start writing our own books. Maybe Melvina should write about the Jacks. So, I have brought some of our books from our bookstore. They are available on the back. Please take a moment and look. Also on our website, you will find that we have a gift store, a good place to buy some souvenirs, some gifts, things about Florence. All of these are ways to support your local archive. In addition, we accept donations of historical books, maps, family history, pictures, and of course we appreciate any financial support. So you can also be a voice of the archive by being a volunteer. We would like to thank all that are dedicated to preserving Fremont's history, the bell tower and its sound person, Scott, and the video team from the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. Thank you. Thank you for being such a good listeners. We have refreshments in the next room. You can meet some of the voices of the archive. And we hope that you will join us next month for the grand finale. We will be connecting all the parts of the lectures this summer and showing you how it formed the village, Florence, Colorado. Thank you.